Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of America. Today is September 16th, 2015. And yeah, there's a lot going on. As always, we have this migrant crisis, which the commentators, I've been reading the commentators, their attitude is just all over the place on what it means, what it's all about, where it's going, and who's responsible for it, and who's even composing the migrants. Who compose the migrants? Who are they? Are they really from Syria? Most of them. Not according to the information I'm getting. We have a really good clip from Syrian Girl, the expat Syrian young woman who does an excellent job of boiling down the events that are pertinent to her area of the world in the Middle East. We do know, of course, that there are a lot of migrants coming from Eastern Europe who are trying to get to Western Europe or Northern Europe. We have a response by the various countries that is more and more, let's try to hold these migrants back and get them at least processed. Now, you have had a situation, and you still have a situation, in numerous locations, one of them being the entrance to the Channel at Calais, in which you have literally thousands of people camped out, actually who are being held off by the French police and the border guards from entering the Channel and walking underneath the English Channel to England. Or they also have been trying to board trains to get to without the proper papers. You know, it's very difficult to immigrate legally to England. Not just anyone can do it. So they're using, by hook or by crook, illegal methods to try to get there. I've heard stories about people who have caravans, trailers that they are carrying behind their vehicle, and then the illegal migrants sneak into the trailer and try to hitch a ride to England that way. So the UK is like Elysium or the happy hunting grounds for the people who are struggling and trying to find a better life for themselves with a higher standard of living. And also, of course, a nice fat check from the government and housing and food every month that will be, you know, way better situation, will help them put them in a way better situation than they were in. And according to Paul Joseph Watson, 85% of these illegal migrants, illegal aliens who are trying to get in these various countries are young males, and they're not necessarily coming from Syria. So let's look at this about 13.5-minute clip, commentary, very informative, by Syrian Girl.
Syrian Girl. The media is painting the refugee crisis as an acute issue, but the Syrian war and refugees have been there for 4 years. And Aylan wasn't the first child refugee to drown. Last month, an 11-year-old Syrian girl drowned off the coast of Egypt. So why is there such a media push now? Well, it's just in time for when France, Britain and Australia were asked to join the US's war on Syria. In fact, the US asked Australia to join its coalition a week before Aylan died. So they're using sympathy for this child's death to drop bombs on more children while crying crocodile tears over them as they run from those bombs. Just look at this headline from The Sun. Bomb Syria for Aylan. You'd think they'd make themselves less obvious. This is the city that Aylan comes from. The area was bombed to smithereens by the US. Rupert Murdoch couldn't even wait for Aylan's body to go cold before he started exploiting it for more war in Syria. Turkey is also causing the refugee crisis to push for the creation of a buffer zone in Syria as part of their continued attempt at regime change. So, before you wave refugees welcome while letting your government get away with murder, there are a few things you need to know. The whole Syrian war and refugees were caused in the first place because the US and NATO backed Islamist rebels in Syria in 2011. In spite of this, politicians and the mass media are blaming the Syrian President Assad for Europe's entire refugee crisis and using that to convince people that there needs to be a war in Syria. But how can Assad be blamed for the entire refugee crisis when the majority of refugees aren't even Syrian, but either poor immigrant workers or refugees from other wars such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Libya, all the other places that have suffered US interventions in recent years? Yet the media labels them all Syrian anyway to convince Europeans that this problem can be solved by intervention in Syria. They even go as far as to label sub-Saharan Africans as Syrian because they believe their viewers are too ignorant to notice the difference. How racist do you have to be to confuse Asia with Africa?
Romania's Coast Guard rescued 70 migrants, mostly Syrians and Iraqis, packed onto a small fishing boat that was in danger of sinking as they attempted to make the crossing to Europe in stormy seas on Saturday.
The number of Syrian refugees is also being falsely conflated because other immigrants and refugees are simply claiming to be Syrian and throwing their original passports away. Pakistani and Bangladeshi passports are being found discarded near border crossings.
Complete is here, 29%.
We're just 4 Syrian
We're just
people.
4 Syrian people.
Syria, all Iraq.
25 in Iraq.
All the rest of them are Iraqi?
And they said I don't have passport. I don't have anything to say who I am. So I'm Syrian. Where's your passport? I don't have because the government in Germany allowed everything for the Syrian people. You get house, you get money, you get food.
So it pays to be Syrian.
Yes.
And some European politicians are exploiting the war in Syria to push for an open border immigration policy. So was it the Syrian government that caused these refugees? Or was it these same politicians and their liberal interventionists that are now crying over the refugees' deaths? People like Angelina Jolie, ironically the ambassador of the UN refugee program, caused these African refugees to drown off the coast of Libya because she supported the Libyan rebels who ethnically cleansed them. It was also Amnesty International who claimed Gaddafi was using black immigrants as mercenaries, which resulted in their ethnic cleansing. Now Amnesty International are raking in the donations over their deaths. It was these same liberal interventionists who in 2011 supported Al-Qaeda-affiliated rebels in Syria, and they dare yell, "Shame, shame, shame," for not letting in the Syrian refugees. How about shame on you for ruining our beautiful country? The refugee crisis didn't start when Syrians tried to cross into Europe, but when Europeans tried to cross into Syria to join ISIS. Syrians are being pushed out of their country while multinational Islamic State moves in from all over the world. But the so-called coalition on ISIS is a lie. The US and its allies have no intention of actually defeating ISIS. Instead of working with the Syrian army, the only force capable of fighting ISIS on the ground, they are preventing the Syrian army from doing their job. Only 4 years ago, Syria was a well-off and prosperous country that even accepted 2 million Iraqi refugees. Now, we've become the refugees. Syrian refugees want your help, yes, but to get back home to their own country. Almost half of Syria's population are refugees, 3 million outside of Syria, and 7 million of them are internally displaced inside Syria. Shouting refugees welcome, while well-meaning, is not enough. You're not going to be able to airlift 10 million Syrians into Europe. Displacing them further from their country is not ideal for anyone. The refugees want to come home. Hear them out for yourself.
حلمي هو إنه ترجع سوريا مثل ما كانت، لأنه أنا أول الناس اللي راح أرجع لها، لأنه بعد سوريا ما في، مهما طلعت وفتلت بعدها ما في.
My name is Rena. I wish to come back to the lovely country when the war will end.
I like the war to be end. Just I can go to see my friends and my family in Syria.
أمر خارجي بتمويل خارجي بس نحن عايشين وراح نرجع وراح نرجع
What's happening now? Happening by foreign hands. We are Syrian, we are a good people. And we want to complete our life in Syria.
بشتاق لكل شيء لحارتنا، لبيتنا، لأهالينا، لجماعاتنا.
You just stop the war, and we don't want to go to Europe.
To help them come home, you need to pressure your government to stop the war in Syria by stopping the US's Saudi Arabian, Qatari and Turkish allies from funding and facilitating ISIS, by ending the political support for Al-Qaeda-linked rebels, and by preventing your government from entering a war against Syria. End the sanctions on Syria. Aylan Kurdi's dad's infected teeth pushed him to try to get to Europe and fix them. Sanctions on Syria prevented his family from sending the $14,000 required to fix them. If there were no sanctions on Syria, he would have got medical care at home and Aylan would still be alive. Before the war, medical care in Syria was free. Sanctions prevent Syria from rebuilding and fighting ISIS off itself. Rebuild Syria for refugees to return. Concentrate on donating to organizations that help refugees inside of Syria. This will decrease the pressure on refugee institutions inside of Syria and help external refugees return, instead of getting on a cracky boat and drowning on the way to Europe. Here are two such organizations, Wafa Relief and the Syrian Red Crescent. The Syrian government wants refugees to return and have put forward a plan to do so. They have asked for help in implementing that plan. Blaming the refugees themselves for the wars NATO creates is not the solution. Suddenly, so many people are disrespecting Syrians, but those people never noticed Syrians in their country when we were inventing the iPhone. Not to mention all of Western civilization. There are forces that want to estrange people from their homeland and dissolve national identities altogether. Obama and other criminals are trying to make Syrians a people without a nation. A people without a nation suffer the worst humiliation. Look at what happened to the Palestinian people. One day it could happen to you. So defending your nationality doesn't mean disrespecting the nationality of others. By demonizing Syrian refugees, right-wing nationalists are handing liberal interventionists moral victory on a silver platter. People are sympathetic to that boy and his family, and any group that demonizes them comes off as being sociopaths and alienate everyone. For example, this UKIP politician had to apologize for his statement, "The little Syrian boy was well clothed and well fed. He died because his parents were greedy for the good life in Europe." Syrians had the good life before the UK government interfered.
Your home?
Nothing. I don't have a home.
And what happened to your business in Aleppo? Does it exist anymore?
No, it's not existed anymore.
Everything gone?
Now he will give you. I am in production here. Now you will give me.
قبل 4 سنين. لا ما فيني بس اتذكر حياتي 4 سنين. كتير كنا عايشين أمان.
Yes, in Syria I had my own car. It's like a car you can't drive. It's really hard to drive in this car. We still don't have a good job to buying a good car like in Syria.
الحمد لله كان كويس منيح يعني وضعنا المالي وكنت ربة منزل وزوجي عم يشتغل الحمد لله بس بعدين انتقلنا صارت شوي مشاكل انتقلنا على الضيعة قلنا يعني الضيعة ما فيها شيء بعدين صارت الحرب بالضيعة اجت جبهة النصرة مسكوه شهر أخذوه شهر كسروا له فكوا
نقعد نتذكر نحن وياهم سوا يعني انه بيتنا كذا ايه بنحكي هيك شغلات مشان يضل الانسان يعني او الطفل في حنين لوطنه يعني ما ينسى خاصة هون معي اطفال يعني.
People ask me, why don't the Syrians stay in Turkey? Well, Syrians who are used to a high standard of living get tired of 3 years in a tent in Turkey with no prospects of a future. Numbers are very high in the million, and conditions are bad. Turkey won't improve these conditions, but want to continue sending terrorists to Syria. People are also asking, why aren't Syrians being helped by other Muslim countries? Well, Turkey and Jordan have taken 1 million each. What these people are really asking is, why aren't the rich Gulf Arab states accepting Syrian refugees? Because in the words of this Kuwaiti politician, we Syrians have a different culture and ethnicity to Arabs. They don't see Syrians as Arab, and they don't accept them as their kin. Since when have the Gulf lifted a finger to help Palestinians anyway? While it is true the people of the Levant have as little in common culturally with Arabs as they do with West Europe, this doesn't change the fact that it is the Gulf Arab states that caused the Syrian problem by backing the terrorists. They won't invest in helping Syrian refugees because they are busy spending the money on ISIS and buying golden toilets. But why doesn't Israel take any refugees? After all, it's on Syria's border and it's in the Levant, Syrian people's historical land. Israel is grayed out in this image, as if it doesn't even warrant consideration. I guess Israel is the only country in the world that's allowed to be racist. It's funny to hear Zionists talk about how Europe needs to accept Syrian refugees when they won't even let Palestinian refugees return to their own homes and villages. I've also heard, why Germany, not Greece? Well, I'll let this Syrian refugee tell you.
والسبب هو انه ما تميت باليونان لانه ما بتقدم اي مساعدات ولا فيها شغل، لانه هي يعني ما خرجت تساعد شعبها لتساعدنا.
The most honorable are the Syrians still in Syria fighting for their country. But how can one blame those that run if they themselves aren't fighting with a gun in their hand? It's time to point that finger inward. Save your nation and stop your governments from starting these wars.
Okay, that was a very interesting clip from Syrian Girl, the journalist who's an expat from Damascus. And, you know, you can really get a sense of where she is coming from, and there's something genuine about what she has to say. She's not a professional. It looks like she's doing it out of her house. It was interesting. She had that little Syrian flag in the background. Yeah, she's got an interesting collection of little clips and interviews that she probably, I don't know, got off the internet, I imagine, and put it together. And the commentary is straightforward, lucid, and it makes sense. And I think there's a lot to be said for that point of view. And we know, of course, that the United States and its European allies are responsible for the chaos in Libya, for instance. Libya was one of the most prosperous, or maybe the most prosperous country in Africa, the most westernized, you could say, the highest standard of living, and this is due to Gaddafi, who, using his dictatorial powers, brought Libya from a very backwards country with a lot of uneducated people in it to a level of prosperity that had been, you know, not seen in Africa for quite a long time. Now the problem with that is that once one country becomes the dominant country in the continent of Africa, this could be a potential threat, is considered to be a threat to the Western powers and those who want to control the continent of Africa. And so it was necessary to make regime change in Gaddafi. Gaddafi would have continued on in charge. I imagine he probably would have given over the reins of power to one of his sons after he retired or died, and it would have continued on in that same manner, just the way you saw with Assad in Syria. Assad's father established the dictatorship in Syria, and I'm not saying that these guys are not problematic in their own right. Gaddafi was a dictator with all the abuses that seem to come and be endemic with the dictatorial power. And the same thing with Assad. Assad has a free hand over his opponents in just the way Saddam Hussein also did. Saddam Hussein, another example of a dictator who ran the country to suit himself, and he oppressed certain groups and he elevated other groups. But overall, the level of prosperity in Iraq was pretty high. And again, he was becoming dominant. He was getting more powerful. He was getting too big for his britches, and he had to be taken out. Now, this is what the Western powers are attempting to do with Assad at the moment. And in the process, they are destroying Syria. They are now partnered with ISIS, which is just Al-Qaeda by another name, and they're doing whatever they can, and they will stop at nothing to make sure that eventually there is regime change in Syria, and you will probably see the same kind of chaos that is happening in Libya and the same kind of chaos that is happening in Iraq. It will be repeated, and it already is, in a sense, being repeated in Syria. And this is the same old story that has been repeated for decade after decade, in which outside influences use their money and their power to fund a fringe group. These dictatorships always have opposition groups that are determined to overthrow the dictator for whatever reason. They may have a grudge. They may have want to get good old-fashioned revenge on the dictator for whatever he did. Nobody in government can get through their policies without creating opponents and sometimes downright enemies. And so, I mean, we've had the same problems here in the United States with attempts to overthrow the government. And it's happened more than once. The one that most interests me in the 20th century, the biggest one, was the business plot in which the grandfather of George W. Bush, Prescott Bush, with other industrialists, wealthy, powerful men, tried to use their influence to create an army of veterans led by General he wrote a book called I can't think of his name right now. I've lost his name, but he wrote a very famous book called War is a Racket, and so they recruited him, and he turned the tables on them. He went along for a while. They were going to make him the first dictator of the United States. They didn't like the democracy. They didn't like the policies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and this Marine general, the most highly decorated Marine in U.S. history, he blew the whistle on them essentially and told the government that they were trying to recruit him to lead an army of veterans against Washington in a coup attempt. And this is in the late 30s. And Prescott Bush and these other wealthy, powerful men actually admired fascism and thought fascism would be a good system for the United States. Yeah, good for them, perhaps. And so, unfortunately, they were not prosecuted. They were just simply too powerful and had too much influence and too many ties with important people in Washington. So the whole affair was swept under the table and it hasn't been given the attention by history that it really deserves. And that shows you what can happen in a country, and in these smaller countries, they really do accomplish this. They overthrow democratically elected governments because, and also dictators as well, because they simply want to, they have the power to do it, and it serves their interests. We have to always remember that there are many wealthy people who really do not care about what happens to ordinary citizens. Their interest is their class, their friends, their family, their buddies who are also involved in essentially running roughshod over anyone who opposes them in their competition among themselves to achieve more and more power. It's like a game. I mean, they even call it a game. And they're determined to win, and they really believe that the old saying that whoever has the most when he dies wins. And we typically laugh, those of us who aren't wealthy typically laugh at that point of view and how shallow it is and how wrong it is, but they actually believe it. Many of them actually believe it. The Rockefeller family, for instance, I mean, they have, what, 3 or 4 generations now of massive power. They managed to keep in the shadows and only release information about themselves through the media, which shows them in a good light. Like we hear NPR shows being funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and you would think, oh, wonderful, you know, the Rockefeller Foundation is doing good work. They're helping to fund these wonderful, informative shows on NPR. Well, believe me, they give money away, yes, but this is to avoid paying taxes on the money, because donations are taxed. This reduces your income, and so they're almost obligated. When you reach this level of wealth, you're almost obligated to give. And it's better than being taxed because there are strings attached, not explicit, but implicit in the gift that you give to, let's say, a powerful media outlet like NPR. Are they going to say anything on that NPR show or NPR in general against the Rockefeller Foundation or the Rockefeller family? I doubt it. Because the Rockefeller Foundation can pull its funding anytime they want. And you get addicted to that money, and so there you are, you're stuck, and you're in a situation where, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You can't get out. So, you know, someone like Syrian girl gives a fresh perspective and gets away from the mainstream media, which is very limited. When I listen to the radio, NPR, and they talk about the migrants, they always use the word people, or maybe children or women. They almost never talk about the young men that make up the majority, by far the majority of the refugees. And it was interesting to me that Syrian girl was showing various still pictures, probably taken by the media, and they always show the women and the children. But by far the majority are young men. They're looking for a better life. They're looking for that support, a home, money, a check, food, in those northern countries. I was reading an article the other day about a guy who, I forget where he said he was from. He might have said he was from Syria, but like she pointed out, many of them claim to be from Syria because Syria is the poster child for the refugees right now. They're the ones that, oh, boo-hoo, we have to help the Syrians. And you saw the difference in the appearance of many of the Syrians from the Saudi Arabians, for instance, or the Kuwaitis. They're very different. They look different. They dress differently. And I guess the only similarity is that they're Muslims. But there's Muslim religion is, of course, one of the world's most popular and powerful religions, and it has, I don't know how many people are Muslim in the world, but a huge number, billions of people are Muslim. And so you have a lot of different brands, a lot of different flavors of Islam. And some are more westernized than others. And you have the very conservative, old-fashioned Muslim in the Arab states, the Gulf states, the oil-rich states, and then in a country like Syria, it's quite a bit different. You can see how westernized they look. So, you know, it's not something that the Syrian people would support to have ISIS, a very strict, conservative brand of Islam. They would not be for that. And you can see how this Syrian girl is right, probably right, in saying the Syrian people do not support it. And they're fighting, and even those who are refugees from Syria want to get back to Syria because they're still very nationalistic and they have a lot of loyalty to their country. And you saw in the video the women, you know, crying, the emotionalism about what is happening to Syria, how much they love their country, the beauty of the country, the neighborhoods, the family, the friends, the homes, the businesses destroyed. And you can say that it's destroyed by the Syrian government, but I don't buy that. I don't buy that. We have given weapons or sold weapons to the Gulf states, and they are more conservative. So they are wanting to expand their sphere of influence and get control over a country like Syria. And so it might be that Kuwaitis, Saudi Arabia, allies of the United States, allies of the West, oil-rich, may have multiple motivations for trying to topple the regime of Assad. And of course, ultimately, the grand enchilada in the Middle East is Iran. And you have to break away Iran's power base in order to weaken Iran, ultimately weaken Iran. Now, the other elephant in the room, of course, is Russia, which you have Putin pledging military support to the Syrian government to fight ISIS and bringing in military weapons to be used. So you have basically two proxy armies: the Gulf state ISIS mercenaries, many of them Saudi Arabians, fighting against Assad, and they are proxies and paid for, trained, many of them, by the West, by the United States. And then on the other side, you have Russia supporting its old ally Syria, the government, and Assad, because Russia has its own agenda, its own motivations. You know, it needs access to those Mediterranean ports, and Syria is very important for Russia to get, like, for instance, oil pipelines and things to Europe and other places in the world. So it's a fight for control of the resources ultimately is typically the way these things play out at the very bottom of the problem. And the fight between the religions is often just an excuse, and yeah, the fighters themselves may actually believe in their religion. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And they're fanatics, but their leadership maybe takes a more practical view that it's really about the wealth of those natural resources that you want to get control of. And so what do we as Americans do? I mean, how can we have to understand, first of all, that for the U.S. to be involved in this conflict and really exercising a policy of destabilization in the Middle East is wrong. We have to understand this. We cannot just say, oh, it's what we do, what the United States does, and shrug our shoulders and go on our merry way. We as American citizens have to really consider the ramifications of doing nothing and supporting this illegal bombing of civilians. I mean, people don't seem to understand that it is illegal to bomb civilians. It's illegal for the U.S. to bomb civilians, for France, for England, for any country. It's against international law. And it makes, whenever the United States, with its commander-in-chief, the president, bombs civilians, that president is putting himself in harm's way and making himself into a war criminal. For each death, I mean, for each civilian death that a U.S. president is responsible for, that is a reason for international tribunals to set that president up in the dock at The Hague and try him on a most serious offense against humanity. And yet, because the U.S. is the top dog in the world and riding high, at least for now, the U.S. president and the generals and the advisors and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the cabinet members and even the members in Congress who support this genocidal, illegal attacks on these various countries is just ongoing. I mean, they need to consider the possible ramifications down the road. America may not always be riding high and the only superpower in the world. I'm not saying that a lot of these other countries are any better. I mean, China and Russia, when it comes right down to it, probably would do about the same. I can't think of any country that has clean hands, the leadership of any country. They all participate in deliberate targeting of civilians to one level or the other. Maybe Japan, you could say. Well, Japan, of course, has a constitution that prohibits it from engaging in any kind of military adventure. But the strange thing about it is that there's a lot of pressure on the government of Japan now to change that clause in the Constitution, which prevents them from, for instance, sending their very small army or navy to a conflict zone in another country to participate. And the Japanese people, who have lived pretty well ever since their new constitution was instituted at the end of the World War II, and they have appreciated this, and they have profited from and prospered from the inability of the government, of their government, to engage in these destructive and morally corrupting conflicts. I mean, of course, we have to remember that Japan did more than its share of human rights violations, horrific treatment of other human beings by the Japanese military during World War II and during that late 30s and right into the end of the war, including their own people. The Japanese people themselves suffered under the depredations of that military class, the samurai class that got control of Japan and really ran it into the ground with their just really mad ambitions of conquest and creating this Japanese empire in the Far East, you know, taking over Japan. Can you imagine China, a colony of Japan, and yet that was the goal of the Japanese military class. They didn't like China. They thought people were inferior, and they just decided that they were going to take over. And they did some horrific things, the rape of Nanking and so on, during that period in China. So the Japanese people have been forced to participate in these horrific war crimes, and the younger generation will have nothing to do with it. I talked to a Japanese woman at length about this not that long ago, and I've seen some videos about it, how there are actually protests in Japan against this proposed change to the Constitution, and they don't like it. They're in the streets about it. They prefer it the way it was set up for them at the end of World War II, when they were under military rule by the West after they were forced to surrender at the end of the war, after the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah, I just remember the name of that guy, that Smedley Butler, the Marine general who blew the whistle on Prescott Bush and his cronies in the late 30s. Yeah, Smedley Butler, I bring him up once in a while, an amazing and very patriotic American. And you might think, well, you know, this is the 21st century. Why are we even caring about countries anymore? Countries don't even matter. Countries are old school. Why not just one world with no borders, no national patriotism, no nationalism at all? Why couldn't we all be citizens of the world and be loyal to everybody, be loyal to the whole world? That is a wonderful dream, and I'm just not sure if the human race has evolved to that point where they're capable of thinking in those terms. Unfortunately, what seems to happen whenever the barriers between countries break down, and you end up having what is essentially an empire. I mean, throughout history, one controlling force has dissolved the borders and the firewalls that are created by borders into an amalgamous stew of small, very weak states under the control of one very powerful state. I mean, give an example of the Roman Empire. And the Roman emperor controlled an enormous territory. It was virtually the entire known world at that time that was under the control of one man who was considered to be a god, the emperor of Rome. And anybody who didn't follow his orders was liable to be shown the error of their ways by a very strong military force that would come marching into their country or their town or their village or whatever, and there would be hell to pay, and this would be the outcome for if you didn't go along. If you disagreed and you wanted to go your own way, you were not allowed to go your own way. So you see, the idea of one world without borders, where there are no countries, very easily could become just simply another Roman Empire or any other empire that you can imagine. The British Empire, I mean, from the 19th century, they had control of countries all over the world, and they imposed their system on those countries, from India to, South Africa, to, well, America itself was a British colony, and so they imposed their brand of their lifestyle on every one of those countries. Legal system, taxation, modes of dress at a certain extent, and the way of thinking was imposed by Britain. And you might say, well, there would be in this new world of no borders, there would be no controlling power. Well, no, everyone would be allowed to do what they want to do. Well, essentially, that would be what we have now, in a sense. Because if you are allowed to go your own way and do what you want to do and have your own little system of government, you're essentially back where you were. You are in a situation of small countries or large countries, as whatever the traditional country would be. Your ethnic group, your tribe, your countrymen, whatever is the boundaries of that country that your group considers to be home, that would be what you have, which is what you have now. And therefore, you're back where you were before you had one world with no borders. So the only way a borderless world can actually last or survive as a borderless world is by one controlling group, one small group that controls the entire world. And essentially, whoever the leader of that group is would be the emperor of the world. And so it would be the world's first true global empire, in which every country is forced, whether they want to or not, to have the similar kind of government under the control. I mean, because they'd be forced to, because they wouldn't be allowed to do things like say, well, we're not going to allow these refugees to come in here because we don't want them here, because we like our own country the way it is, and we don't want to change. We don't want to change it. And they would say, well, hey, buddy, you don't have control over your country. We're going to tell you what to do, whether you like it or not. Because, hey, it's one world with no borders, right? Everybody a citizen of the world. And if you're a citizen of the world, you can go where you want. If there are no countries, there are no borders and no one to stop you. So you can go wherever you want. And you see a nice country that's really prosperous, doing well, and you say, I want to go there. And thousands or millions of other people, they get on the internet and they find the best place to live, and they say, I'm going to go there too. We're all going to go there. Millions of people. Can you imagine what's a really nice place in America that people might want to live? Let's say Sedona, Arizona. They would say, Sedona, Arizona, that's incredible. Look at those beautiful red rocks. Look at that really high mountain desert air, nice and dry, not humid. That's where I want to go. And so millions of people around the world just say, you know, I think that's a great idea too. Everybody else is going there. Let's go there too. And that would then all of a sudden you have all these people who have very little money and they don't have any place to live. So the town of Sedona has to come up with the money to house all these people, to feed all these people, to try to find something for them to do, to police them, to protect them, and on and on and on and on and on. And then the residents of Sedona are going, well, this is not any good. This is terrible. I mean, it was so peaceful here, and now it's just a madhouse. Well, like take for instance, okay, Japan, for instance. And some people might, what if a bunch of people from around the world suddenly decided they wanted to go to Japan? It's like, wow, Japan's a great country. Wonderful tradition. I love the way they dress, and they're so polite to each other, and they have no crime in in Japan, which is true. Virtually no crime. And you have, everyone is so polite, and I love the nightlife in Tokyo. It's just so exciting. It's very futuristic. I want to go there. Do you actually think that the Japanese government would let anyone who wanted to move to Japan for no reason, to just get on a plane or get on a boat and just land on the shores of Japan and just take over, you know, all these people from... No, the Japanese people they don't like foreigners very much, actually. They don't like people who are even Korean, who look very similar. They don't like even Chinese people that much, or Indonesians, or anybody. If they're not Japanese, they consider them pretty much to be inferior. They consider Westerners gaiji. My sister was over there many, many years ago, and little kids would chase her down the street yelling at her, gaiji, 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 meaning foreigner, and laugh at how strange that she looked. And you could say, well, maybe that's the reason why they should have lots and lots of foreigners in Japan. Maybe that's what they need, because they need to learn diversity, that diversity is good, and they shouldn't be prejudiced against white people, foreigners, or black people, or other Asian people, and we should just force them to accept all of these refugees, economic refugees. I mean, there are lots and lots of poor people in America who are really having a hard time, and they might think, well, you know, Japan looks really good. I'm going to hop on a plane and move there. I'm sick of the United States. It's too messed up. I mean, I'm going to a place where there's no crime. I'm getting the hell out of Compton. I'm getting the hell out of Missouri or New Jersey or wherever, you know, Newark, New Jersey, and all these places that are just hellholes now, apparently, with crime. And I'm tired of having my kids shot at accidentally, you know, and local kids being forced into gangs. I'm moving to Japan. That's where I'm going. Wow, that sounds great. And okay, well, maybe you say that's the way it should be, you know. And if the Japanese people don't like it, well, there's nothing they can do about it because there are no borders. Now, a lot of Americans, I think, would love to move to Mexico or some of these other Central American or South American countries, but unfortunately, there is a long process of actually moving to Mexico. And if you, I mean, you can go there on a tourist visa, but then you have to go back home and you have to renew your visa and you have to get permission and you have to have a certain amount of money. They're not going to let anybody just in, even though they could probably use some of that American money. I don't know. Right now, mostly it seems to be it's the Mexican people and the Central American people who are wanting to get to the United States, but then they're finding that it's not that great even here, actually, and they're being used as low-wage workers. They're being exploited. Something I read recently was that most of the illegal immigrants are being welcomed into the states with Republican governors. And it could be that I'm not down on Republicans at all, but a lot of Republicans are into business, and they might actually like this idea of having undocumented workers. In a way, that's a great idea. They're hardworking. You can abuse them, even sexually if you want. You can exploit them. You can even use them as slave labor, like forcing them to stay unpaid overtime. And what are they going to do about it? They're not going to be able to do anything about it because they don't have any papers. They're not citizens. They're not here illegally. They don't even have a work permit. They have nothing. So you can just use them and pay them half of what you pay an American worker, and that makes your profits go up. And so this could be one of the reasons why so many people in Congress say, hey, well, let's get rid of these borders, and a lot of Democrats say that, let's get rid of these borders. Maybe they have businesses that would profit by this entire class of workers who have no rights. You don't have to pay them insurance. You don't have to pay any benefits. There's no retirement. There's nothing. You just get almost free workers to I don't know, pick your crops and make your gadgets, to do whatever it is you do. You know, run the service that you have, your hotels, clean your hotels, your motels, your restaurants, you can pay them, I don't know, 1/2 to 1/3 to 1/4 of what you'd be required legally to pay an American who is, has all these rights. And I mean, like I said, sexually, I mean, if there's a pretty one, you could just say, hey, I want you to come to my office once a week to take care of me, or else you're fired. What's to stop them from doing that? If these people are desperate enough, they're going to do that. So, I mean, that's a great deal for them. So it's not quite so altruistic as we think. These people who want to bring in more and more and more illegal immigrants in this country. That doesn't sound like so great for anybody except for them. Okay, so that's all there is for today. Ran out of time. Have a great weekend. Sleep well, friends.